Madeline Hartley was not the kind of woman who demanded attention when she entered a room. She wasn't loud, she didn't dress to turn heads, and she didn't crave validation. Yet, somehow, she always left a mark on people. Born in Duluth, Minnesota, Maddie was the middle child of a no-nonsense postal clerk mother and a quiet but brilliant handyman father. Their three-bedroom home sat on the edge of an old railway line, where Maddie grew up listening to trains rumble through the night, imagining they were rockets headed to Mars. Her childhood was spent surrounded by books on astrophysics and motherboards salvaged from broken radios. Maddie's fascination with how things work turned into a quiet passion for systems engineering. She often worked late in the garage with her dad, tinkering with circuits and coding with borrowed library manuals while her siblings mocked her for never owning makeup or dating in high school. But Maddie didn't mind. She had dreams bigger than her zip code. Her family's financial situation, however, kept her grounded. When her father fell ill during her sophomore year of college, Maddie picked up extra shifts tutoring underclassmen and assembling computer parts in a dusty corner of a tech repair shop. It was during those long, lonely nights she bonded with her best friend, Tricia Langford, a sarcastic, confident black woman from Brooklyn who had moved to Minnesota for college on a scholarship. Tricia was everything Maddie wasn't, fierce, outspoken, and full of flair, but their friendship was seamless. Tricia often teased Maddie about her obsession with drone mechanics and stargazing, but she never failed to defend her. On the other side of the family tree was Serena Hartley, Maddie's 5 years younger sister, a bold, free-spirited interior architect whose world revolved around aesthetics, color palettes, and modernist minimalism. Serena and Maddie had different temperaments, but shared a childhood promise: never let any man silence your voice. That vow would later become prophetic. Despite their differences, the three women became an inseparable triangle of loyalty. Maddie, the thinker; Tricia, the warrior; Serena, the artist. By her late 20s, Maddie had worked her way up as a systems analyst at a firm in Minneapolis, handling high-level data integrations for national healthcare software. It wasn't glamorous, but it was solid, secure, and hers. She found joy in routines, watching meteor showers at night with hot tea and sketching blueprints for her custom drones on weekends. What she craved most, though, was not fame or recognition. It was emotional safety, a home where she didn't have to measure her worth. As quiet as her life appeared, Maddie dreamed loudly of sharing it with someone who didn't just admire her intelligence but protected it. And on a cold January day in Chicago, with snow falling outside a crowded tech convention, that person, or who she thought was that person, walked straight into her world. Colin Rourke grew up on the rougher side of Salem, Oregon, in a single-bedroom duplex with cracked ceilings and a mother who perfected emotional manipulation like it was an Olympic sport. Gloria Rourke was a former beauty queen turned bitter after years of disappointment and abandonment, projecting every ounce of her unfulfilled ambition onto Colin. She would say, "If you can't be someone powerful, then make sure you look like you are." From the age of 13, Colin was taught to charm, deceive, and rise by appearance, not substance. He could sell water to a drowning man, as his high school counselor once remarked, but beneath his persuasive smile and tailored language was a deep insecurity masked by designer suits and curated Instagram reels. His only real talent was branding, and he used it to start a small digital marketing agency after dropping out of community college, leveraging charm, luck, and a few stolen design templates to land clients who didn't look too closely. Despite early setbacks, including a lawsuit from a local contractor and an embarrassing bankruptcy filing at 25, Colin refused to stay down. He saw every stumble as a prelude to the glory he believed was inevitable. It was during this fall that his longtime girlfriend, Danielle Rains, a self-absorbed financial analyst with a high tolerance for luxury and a low tolerance for poverty, walked out on him, taking his best friend, and their shared savings, with her. The betrayal left a gaping hole in Colin's ego, sparking a relentless obsession with winning at any cost. He scrubbed his online history, rebranded his image, and began studying marketing psychology. He'd rehearse elevator pitches in the mirror, memorize power words, and practice softening his tone when addressing women to appear sensitive. Success to him was no longer about stability or love, it was about reputation, wealth, and dominance. By 27, Colin had managed to build Corelight Media, a flashy new startup focused on influencer branding, attracting low-budget clients and investors who didn't question his inflated metrics. It was all smoke and mirrors, but it worked. It was during a pitch panel at the Intertech Innovators Conference in Chicago that fate, or calculated design, intersected his life with Maddie Hartley's. She was there presenting an innovative data integrating prototype for hospital logistics. He was there pretending to be a guest speaker on behalf of a partnership he'd exaggerated. Maddie's calm precision intrigued Colin. She didn't try to impress anyone. She was simple but disarmingly sharp. He watched her from a distance, and when he heard her correct a tech VP's flawed data model during a panel Q&A, he decided then and there she could be useful, both professionally and personally. Colin wasn't looking for love, but someone who could anchor his chaotic mind while also raising his credibility. And Maddie, in her quiet elegance and overlooked brilliance, fit that fantasy perfectly. He approached her after her presentation, all charm and wit, and offered to grab coffee and exchange ideas. What began as a casual conversation would soon become the opening chapter of his most calculated venture yet. The rain started as a drizzle that evening as Maddie and Colin walked out of the conference center, side by side beneath the buzzing streetlights of downtown Chicago. She had politely declined his offer for dinner, but he suggested walking her to the train station, just to continue their talk on scalable branding and user interaction systems. What started as a technical conversation soon turned personal. Colin, always quick to adapt, shared just enough about his supposed humble beginnings and how he had clawed his way into the tech space. Maddie, slightly surprised by his vulnerability, offered a soft smile, listening more than speaking. When the rain intensified, they ducked into a closed coffee shop's covered patio, soaking wet but laughing. It wasn't romantic in the classic sense, more like two strangers easing into a shared warmth they didn't know they needed. It was the first time in a while Maddie had laughed like that. She didn't notice how quickly the time passed. Colin was drawn to Maddie's grounded presence. She was unlike the hyper-ambitious women he'd surrounded himself with, those who measured success with champagne toasts and social media followers. Maddie was intelligent without being arrogant, and her simplicity was refreshing. She spoke about her childhood garage experiments with an almost shy delight and mentioned a drone prototype she had shelved due to lack of funding. Colin sensed her potential, not just in a business sense, but as a woman who could make him look good, feel important, and provide balance to his chaos. That night, as they shared an umbrella on the walk to her train stop, he subtly inserted compliments wrapped in curiosity. He asked about her favorite constellation, remembered her sister's name when she mentioned Serena, and offered to connect her with the few funding leads he claimed to know. Maddie, though usually guarded, felt a rare comfort in his presence. She gave him her real phone number, something she hadn't done in over a year. By the time Maddie got home to her small apartment, her hair still damp and cheeks flushed, Tricia was waiting with takeout and a sarcastic look. "Who's the soap mystery man who just dropped you off like it's a rom-com?" she teased, poking at Maddie's soggy coat. Maddie hesitated, unsure how to label the encounter. "Just someone interesting," she replied softly, disappearing into her bedroom. Tricia, ever the realist, didn't like the sound of it. She made a mental note to look him up. Meanwhile, Colin sat alone in his hotel room, reviewing Maddie's LinkedIn profile. She had strong technical skills, a modest following, and a reputation in healthcare systems. He smiled. "You'll be useful," he whispered to himself, setting her photo as a contact image. What Maddie felt was a spark, what Colin saw was strategy. But the rain had blurred the lines just enough to let the beginning feel like something real. It had been nearly a year since that rainy night in Chicago, and Maddie's life had shifted in ways she couldn't have predicted. Colin became a constant, calling in the mornings, sending thoughtful texts during her workdays, surprising her with dinner after late coding sessions. He never pressured her, always played the patient listener, and slowly embedded himself into her world. Tricia remained skeptical but reluctantly admitted that Colin had been consistent. Serena, on the other hand, adored him, charmed by his wit and attentiveness. Their bond grew deeper as Colin made subtle gestures to show he was serious, introducing her to his investor friends, most of whom were far more impressed by Maddie's intelligence, attending her work events, and even helping her mother with home repairs. What Maddie didn't know was that every move Colin made was curated to seem organic, designed to make her feel safe, because safety, he learned, was her weakness. The proposal came on the same evening Serena had planned to announce her own engagement to Marcus DaCosta, her longtime partner and a rising Navy officer. What was meant to be a quiet dinner at Serena's favorite rooftop lounge overlooking the city turned into an elaborate night of surprises. Colin had arranged a private astronomer to project constellations across the dome above the lounge, pretending it was part of the venue's experience package. He led Maddie to the center as her family and close friends watched from a distance, then dropped to one knee beneath a glittering projection of the Andromeda Galaxy. The ring, vintage, sapphire, elegant, was exactly her style, something she once casually mentioned while window shopping with Serena. Tears welled in Maddie's eyes as she said yes. Cameras clicked. Guests clapped. But the moment Serena tried to share her own news afterward, the attention remained on Maddie and Colin. Marcus remained composed, but Serena's smile wavered. That night planted a seed of resentment neither sister could yet name. Later that week, Tricia confronted Maddie in private. "You're happy, and I'll never ruin that," she began, "but I need to ask, do you really know him?" Maddie, glowing with excitement and adorned in newly posted engagement selfies, brushed it off. "Tricia, he's been nothing but kind. Maybe you're just overprotective." Tricia bit her tongue but didn't back down. "Just don't disappear into him, Maddie. Remember who you are." Maddie promised she wouldn't. But in the weeks that followed, subtle things began to change. Colin criticized her clothing choices during dinners with his clients, casually redirected conversations when she brought up her drone project, and began referencing their future startup ideas, where her technical skills would be better utilized behind the scenes. She chalked it up to stress, pressure, nerves. Love required compromise, right? What she didn't realize was that this engagement was not just a union, it was a quiet erasure, one subtle suggestion at a time. The wedding was everything Maddie never imagined she'd want, grand, dramatic, and almost too perfect. It was held at the historic Briarstone Estate in upstate New York, a venue Colin insisted on despite Maddie's initial protests about budget and simplicity. He said, "This is about setting the tone for the rest of our lives. Power couples don't get married in backyards." Eventually, she relented. Tricia was maid of honor, reluctantly helping navigate seating arrangements, many of which were filled with Colin's influencer acquaintances, business associates, and investors who cared more about optics than the couple. Maddie's side was small, intimate, full of heartfelt guests, her mother, Serena, Marcus, and two childhood neighbors who knew her love for robotics since she was 10. The contrast was glaring, but Maddie told herself it was a merging of worlds. The ceremony was live-streamed. Drone cameras hovered over the garden. It felt like a show. Maddie tried to focus on Colin's vows, but they felt eerily scripted. During the reception, Serena gave an emotional speech, recalling their childhood promise never to settle for anyone who didn't value their voices. It was touching, until Colin joked loudly from his seat, "Well, she definitely didn't settle. I've got the receipts." The crowd laughed, but Maddie felt a strange hollowness in her stomach. Tricia, on the other hand, wasn't laughing. She excused herself halfway through her toast and never returned to the microphone. While Colin mingled with a group of VC partners and posed for photos with his arm around Maddie like she was a trophy, Tricia pulled Serena aside and asked quietly, "Have you seen the way he talks over her?" Serena, glowing in her bridesmaid dress, brushed it off, perhaps out of loyalty, perhaps out of denial. But what caught Tricia's attention most wasn't just Colin's controlling glances or rehearsed charisma. It was a woman standing at the edge of the event, a guest no one recognized, watching closely with sharp eyes and a familiar smirk. Danielle Rains. Later that night, as Maddie opened wedding gifts alone in their honeymoon suite, Colin had left to meet a client for a quick drink. She found an envelope tucked inside a plain silver-wrapped box. There was no sender name, just her name handwritten across it. Inside was a single note, "Check his downtown lease." The keys under the Bentley mat. Maddie stared at it for minutes, her hands shaking. She tucked it beneath her pillow without saying a word. When Colin returned hours later, smelling like expensive cologne and foreign whiskey, she didn't ask questions. Instead, she smiled, poured him a drink, and said, "Tell me about your meeting." He talked for 15 minutes straight. Not once did he ask how she felt on their wedding night. Not once did he notice the quiet shift in her eyes. And in that silence, Maddie realized, this wasn't a marriage. It was a beautifully curated performance, and she was the centerpiece. The first year of marriage unfolded like a meticulously wrapped gift, pleasing on the outside, hollow within. Maddie settled into her new role as Mrs. Rourke with quiet grace, maintaining her job as a systems analyst while subtly stepping back from her independent drone projects. Colin, now absorbed in expanding Corelight Media and curating their image as a power couple, began traveling frequently, often to Los Angeles or Miami, citing investor meetings and brand expansion. At first, Maddie welcomed the quiet. But over time, the house grew colder, her evenings lonelier. She would wake up to a cold side of the bed and emails from Colin at 2 a.m. with vague updates. When she brought up how disconnected she felt, he kissed her forehead and promised, "This is the price of building an empire. Soon we'll have more time than we know what to do with." But his phone was always turned down when he slept, and the passwords she once knew had mysteriously changed. Her sense of self, once vibrant and confident, slowly began to erode beneath constant, subtle dismissals. When Maddie excitedly shared news of a national drone innovation contest she'd entered, Colin barely looked up from his phone. "A toy competition?" he scoffed. "I thought we were past that hobby phase." She laughed nervously, brushing off the sting, but Tricia noticed the shift. During a rare brunch between the three of them, Tricia asked Colin what he thought of Maddie's entry. Colin chuckled, "I told her she's smart enough to focus on real tech." Maddie remained silent, slicing her avocado toast into perfect triangles. The woman who once corrected professors during lectures now second-guessed her every sentence. Even Serena, who had always admired Maddie's poise, commented one night, "You don't glow like you used to, Mads." Maddie waved it off. Marriage just takes adjusting. But deep inside, she knew she was adjusting to shrinking herself. What Maddie didn't know was that Colin had slowly reconnected with Danielle under the pretense of business consulting. Danielle, now managing her own small PR firm, had begun advising Corelight Media on expansion strategy. Their meetings, supposedly strictly professional, grew increasingly personal. Meanwhile, Maddie buried herself in the structure of her routines: early morning coffee, 9 to 5 analytics work, calls with Serena, and late-night tinkering with drones she never showed anyone. Her once joyful solitude turned into a quiet ache. Even Tricia's presence felt distant now. She had accepted a short-term international fellowship in Berlin. Maddie's support system was thinning, and Colin's attention had clearly shifted. But Maddie didn't complain. She journaled more instead, pages and pages of unsent letters, questions she never asked aloud, and dreams she tried not to forget. She had once promised herself never to disappear inside a relationship. But standing in her own kitchen, staring at her reflection in a glass cabinet door, she hardly recognized the woman blinking back. It was a forgotten dry-cleaning receipt that first led Maddie to question the obvious. Colin had been out of town, supposedly in San Diego for a tech summit, when she found the slip crumpled in the inside pocket of his discarded blazer. The address on the receipt was not familiar, and the date didn't align with his claimed itinerary. Maddie's fingers trembled as she unfolded it again and checked the timestamp. Her instinct screamed, but her mind rationalized. Still, curiosity gnawed at her, louder than her own reassurances. That weekend, while Colin claimed to be visiting his mother in Oregon, Maddie tracked the address. It led to a sleek, upscale high-rise in Manhattan's financial district, a place he never mentioned. She waited across the street in a parked cab for hours. And then she saw it, Danielle Rains, in sunglasses and heels, entering the building like she belonged there. Maddie didn't follow. She didn't cry. She simply took a photo and tucked the truth away, just like she had learned to tuck away her emotions. That night, Maddie quietly pulled out the note she had once hidden beneath her pillow on their wedding night, the one that warned her about a downtown lease. Her hands were steadier this time. She drove to Colin's Bentley, found the mat, and beneath it, exactly where the note had said, was a spare keycard wrapped in a tiny envelope. She didn't go straight to the apartment. Instead, she returned home, opened her old college laptop, the one Colin never bothered with, and began researching surveillance gadgets. Within 24 hours, she had ordered a discreet GPS tracker, a microcamera disguised as a smoke detector, and a remote monitoring app. Maddie didn't yell. She didn't confront. She documented. Quietly. Carefully. She had learned from Colin to play the long game. While he flaunted success and flattery in public, Maddie prepared in private. And in that preparation, her once muted fire began to reignite, not from rage, but from strategy. With every passing week, the data collected painted a clearer picture. Late-night visits, matching wine orders, shared car trips. Colin wasn't even cautious anymore. He lived as though Maddie didn't matter, like she'd become invisible, nothing more than a quiet appendage to his curated image. But Maddie was watching. Every move, every lie, every false apology text was backed up and stored in a secure cloud drive. She also began journaling again, daily. Not out of sadness this time, but documentation. Her once abandoned notebook transformed into a coded timeline of betrayal. She even began revisiting her drone prototypes, not for competition, but with sharper upgrades, enhanced with surveillance features. Maddie was no longer the woman waiting for love to save her. She was preparing for the unraveling of the illusion she had once called marriage. And with every quiet step she took, she vowed, when the moment came, she would not beg, plead, or break. She would expose the truth, and then she would walk away. Silent. Whole. And powerful. Tricia Langford returned from Berlin with jet lag and skepticism as her only luggage. She had kept tabs on Maddie from a distance, often sensing something wrong from the dull tone of her friend's voice during late-night calls. Maddie never outright admitted the problem, but Tricia had known her long enough to decode silences. A week after her return, Tricia suggested a spa day, one she booked at an exclusive midtown lounge she knew Danielle frequented. Maddie agreed reluctantly, not revealing how deeply she already suspected Danielle's involvement. As they sipped cucumber water in the lobby, Tricia excused herself and slipped down the corridor toward the private sauna wing. There, through the frosted glass of a steam room door left slightly ajar, she saw Danielle, laughing in a silk robe, wine glass in hand, gloating to a friend, "Any day now, he's filing for divorce." I didn't crawl back into his life for scraps. Tricia froze. Her instincts had been dead on. That evening, Tricia invited Maddie over for wine and grilled salmon, setting the mood with calm music and dim lights, anything to soften the blow of the truth she was about to deliver. She didn't dramatize it. She simply laid out what she had heard and showed Maddie a secret photo she had snapped with her phone. Maddie stared at the image without a flicker of surprise. Her silence didn't come from shock, it came from confirmation. Slowly, she reached into her purse and pulled out her own collection, timestamps, photos, audio clips, transaction logs. Tricia's eyes widened with disbelief. "You've known?" Maddie nodded. "Since the month after our wedding. I've just been collecting. I'm not screaming, Trish. I'm not begging. I'm building a blueprint." That night, the two women sat together like silent tacticians. It wasn't just about exposing Colin's betrayal, it was about reclaiming everything Maddie had lost along the way, her voice, her autonomy, her brilliance. From that moment forward, Maddie began restructuring her life beneath the surface. With Tricia's help, and quiet support from Serena and Marcus, she started funneling Colin's stolen ideas back into her name. Using legal loopholes and a newly formed shell company registered in Delaware, Maddie took control of her proprietary drone designs and filed new patents under her own separate entity, Hartley Innovations. Marcus, trained in military logistics and deeply familiar with digital security, helped set up firewalls and encryption tools to ensure her work remained untouched. Maddie also began moving joint savings into offshore escrow accounts Colin didn't know existed. Every signature she had given him, every document he had filed, was now being revisited by legal experts through Tricia's former law school contacts. And the most poetic part of it all? Colin had no idea. He was too busy whining and dining Danielle, whispering lies into champagne glasses, believing he held the winning hand. But the game had changed. And Maddie was no longer a pawn, she was the architect of his undoing. While Maddie quietly built the skeleton of Colin's collapse, her sister Serena hardly faced a storm of her own, one that had nothing to do with betrayal and everything to do with her body. A month before her wedding to Marcus DaCosta, Serena experienced a sharp, persistent pelvic pain that landed her in urgent care. After several appointments and emotional exhaustion, she was diagnosed with a severe form of endometriosis, with doctors gently informing her that conceiving might not be easy, perhaps even impossible. Serena was devastated. She had always dreamed of motherhood, imagined pastel nurseries and lullabies echoing through minimalist halls. Marcus, who had always seemed calm and unwavering, grew strangely quiet after the diagnosis. He didn't withdraw entirely, but Serena could feel a wall begin to rise between them. He postponed their wedding until things settled, but Serena knew the truth, uncertainty scared him, and it was threatening to unravel everything they'd built. Maddie, despite her own secret war, became Serena's anchor. She accompanied her to doctor visits, brought her herbal teas and heating pads, and reminded her daily that womanhood was not defined by reproduction. Serena tried to stay strong, posting happy photos and wedding planning quotes on social media, but inside, she was unraveling. The pressure of Marcus's silence weighed more than the pain in her abdomen. At dinner one evening, she brought up adoption, testing the waters. Marcus shifted uncomfortably and said, "Let's not plan for the worst yet." But Serena wasn't planning for the worst, she was preparing for a future that might require a different path. Meanwhile, Maddie noticed Colin had begun making sly, patronizing jokes at Serena's expense, calling her overly emotional or too dramatic. Danielle laughed along. Maddie said nothing aloud, but she didn't forget. It became increasingly clear that Colin didn't just disrespect her, he had no regard for the people she loved. Despite her pain, Serena became more perceptive, more attuned to the tension around Maddie. She asked one night, while they folded laundry together, "Are you sure you're okay? You seem hollow." Maddie paused, then replied softly, "I'm not broken, just quiet." "There's a difference." Serena didn't push further, but she began observing Colin more closely. She noticed his eyes linger too long on his phone during family events, saw how he minimized Maddie's achievements in front of others, how his compliments felt rehearsed. One evening, when Colin mocked Maddie's drone design in front of Marcus, calling it a side project with no real market, Serena's heart twisted. She saw the way Maddie's face tightened and how she excused herself to the bathroom, her shoulders hunched as if bearing invisible weights. Serena knew now that something terrible was brewing, and when the time came, she would not stand by and let her sister collapse alone. Maddie hardly disappeared, at least from the surface. Publicly, she remained the poised, dutiful wife of a rising entrepreneur, occasionally seen at charity galas and dinner parties hosted by Colin's investor friends. Privately, however, she was undergoing a silent metamorphosis. Using an alias, Elena Cross, and dressing down in jeans and oversized hoodies, Maddie began attending an exclusive women in tech think tank under a private scholarship. The organization, TechCrafters Society, was invitation-only and catered to female inventors and engineers looking to disrupt stagnant industries. Maddie never mentioned Colin. Her focus was her drone technology, now enhanced with new features, AI adaptability, emergency response compatibility, and groundbreaking predictive navigation. She spoke little during meetings but listened intently, noting every insight that could help her stay 10 steps ahead. No one suspected the woman eating granola bars in the back row was already the mind behind one of the most pirated tech blueprints in Corelight Media's archives. Within 3 months, Maddie secured early-stage funding through a blind proposal submission. Her shell company, Hartley Innovations, received a $600,000 seed grant from a private incubator in Switzerland, enough to build a lab space in an industrial zone in New Jersey. There, she worked with military consultants and civilian engineers, often late into the night, refining what she quietly called the Phoenix model. While Colin basked in panels and red carpets, Maddie crafted something revolutionary, tech capable of saving lives during natural disasters and warfare. She brought Serena in as a part-time design consultant for interiors and labeling and paid her through encrypted bank wires. Tricia, now back from Berlin, handled her corporate legal protections, ensuring every patent, file, and transaction was untraceable to her real name. It wasn't revenge Maddie was chasing, it was reclamation. She didn't want to merely expose Colin. She wanted to erase the very foundation he stood on by proving she was always the architect behind his illusion of success. Meanwhile, Danielle began pressuring Colin to make a move. "She's sweet and all, but she's deadweight now," she purred one night while sipping wine in his hidden penthouse apartment. "You've got investors watching. They need to see you aligned with someone who fits your vision." Colin, emboldened by the fake confidence that success brings, began drafting divorce scenarios with Richard Greaves, his conniving venture capitalist associate. What he didn't know was that Richard had secretly begun vetting Maddie after a quiet tip came from an anonymous source, Tricia. Maddie's layers of defense were not just about protection, they were strategic landmines placed in every room Colin walked into. As Danielle posed in couture and whispered manipulations, and Colin plotted timelines for Maddie's quiet removal, they both missed the growing roar behind the silence Maddie had perfected. The reckoning wasn't approaching, it had already begun, and neither of them saw it coming. The night before their 4th wedding anniversary arrived with the kind of stillness that usually precedes a storm. Maddie stood by the large bay window in their home, watching city lights flicker like false stars. Colin had been unusually affectionate all day, leaving gifts on the kitchen counter, whispering sweet nothings, even offering to whisk her away the following evening for a grand surprise. But Maddie knew better now. The signs were everywhere. His phone was locked tighter than a vault, and his browser history was too clean to be real. Earlier that week, while syncing shared calendars on the cloud, Maddie had intercepted a flagged file, one labeled PHX Beta Takeover, a direct clone of her prototype, submitted by Colin to Richard Greaves under Corlight's brand. Her name was nowhere in the document. The betrayal was no longer emotional, it was criminal. That evening, Maddie sat down and finalized the last pieces of a puzzle she had spent nearly a year crafting. Tomorrow, the trap would spring. As Colin slept beside her, blissfully unaware, Maddie sent 5 anonymous emails, each addressed to a key investor, a journalist at Tech Times Weekly, the CEO of TechCrafters Society, and 2 legal advisors tied to the startup incubator funding her company. The files attached were damning: internal communications, patent submission timestamps, and the full forensic audit of how Colin had lifted her intellectual property and funneled it into his fraudulent pitch. Every screenshot was backed by date-stamped evidence and blockchain verification. She signed each email with the pseudonym The Original Architect. Her heart raced, not with fear, but with the strange exhilaration of control. She then messaged Tricia, "Tomorrow, 9 p.m. Don't be late. Wear red." Tricia responded instantly, "The Queen is ready." Maddie slipped her phone under her pillow and returned to bed, her mind still calculating. She wasn't hoping to hurt Colin. She was simply done protecting him from the consequences of who he truly was. The next morning, Colin rose early, humming as he made coffee. "Tonight will be unforgettable," he smirked, handing her a cappuccino in her favorite mug. Maddie smiled softly. "I'm sure it will." She wore white all day, an unspoken nod to how she once believed in beginnings, in love, and clean slates. She packed a small clutch, loaded with nothing but her phone, ID, and a drive containing one final copy of her master file. Meanwhile, Richard Greaves called Colin to confirm the evening's guest list. "Investors are excited," Richard said. "And Danielle? She's ready to shine." Colin grinned. Everything was going as planned, or so he thought. What none of them knew was that every guest invited, every speech Colin had rehearsed, and every toast raised in his name would become evidence of the greatest personal and professional takedown the tech world had ever witnessed. The celebration Colin thought would crown him. would be the one that buried him. The venue was breathtaking, an Art Deco ballroom lit with golden chandeliers and draped in rich velvet curtains. Guests arrived in waves, dressed in designer suits and couture gowns, their chatter filled with excitement over Colin Rourke's latest innovation announcement and what many believed would be a preview of Corlight's next big merger. Maddie arrived in silence, wearing a sleek crimson gown that wrapped around her like a battle flag. Tricia stood at her side, radiant and unbothered, drawing admiration from passing guests. Danielle was already present, confidently laughing with Richard Greaves, dressed in a silver dress that matched the shimmer in her ambition. Colin moved around like a monarch, shaking hands, making jokes, kissing cheeks. Everyone whispered about a rumored reveal. As the lights dimmed and champagne glasses clinked, Colin took the stage, inviting Maddie to join him. For years of love, success, and power, he began, then added with a wicked smile, and a new chapter with someone who truly sees me. Gasps echoed through the room as Danielle joined him on stage, looping her arm around his waist like a final nail in a coffin. Colin smiled at Maddie as if waiting for her to crumble, to cry, to break. But Maddie didn't flinch. She didn't blink. She simply stared, her expression unreadable. Colin raised his glass, toasted to growth, and announced Danielle as his new life partner, both romantically and in business. The crowd was a mix of awkward claps, confusion, and awe. Tricia placed a hand on Maddie's shoulder, but Maddie remained calm. She walked to the bar, ordered water with lime, and toasted quietly to herself. Danielle gave a gloating speech about new beginnings and aligning with passion. As cameras flashed and investors murmured, Maddie watched them all, every face, every grin, every back she would never need again. Her lips moved without sound, let them laugh now. He'll come begging. As the night wore on, Maddie stepped outside onto the balcony overlooking the Manhattan skyline. Her phone buzzed with updates. Every email she sent the night before had landed. The journalist at Tech Times Weekly responded with a promise of a full expose. Legal advisors had begun internal audits of Corlight Media, and the Swiss incubator had flagged Richard Greaves for compliance review. Inside, Danielle danced with Colin, basking in her victory, unaware that the clock on their fantasy had already begun ticking down. Maddie turned toward Tricia, who handed her the slim flash drive containing the final algorithm, unregistered by Corlight, protected under her alias. Maddie smiled, not with joy, but with satisfaction. Tonight wasn't the death of a marriage, it was the birth of a reckoning. And when the dust would settle, there would be no debate about who the real architect had been. The world had laughed. Now it would listen. By morning, the illusion began to crumble. Investors who had applauded Colin the night before awoke to front-page alerts from Tech Times Weekly. The real architect behind Corlight's innovation exposes shocking betrayal. Attached to the digital article were legal documents, patent filings, and date-stamped screenshots tracing Colin's fraudulent use of Maddie's intellectual property. The report detailed how a majority of Corlight's valuation rested on the drone technology Maddie had designed under her own name, years before she married Colin. The article named her only by her alias, the original architect, but whispers began immediately. Tricia, who had preemptively blocked Corlight's access to Hartley Innovations patents, monitored the frenzy from her office. Serena, though still dealing with her own emotional battles, stayed glued to the news and wept, not from sadness, but relief. Maddie, meanwhile, made no public statement. She didn't need to. Her silence was louder than any press release. The fallout was nuclear. Within 72 hours, Corlight stock, previously rumored for a massive private acquisition, plummeted by 43%. Investors withdrew. Richard Greaves attempted to distance himself, claiming ignorance, but anonymous leaks proved he had knowingly signed off on stolen work. The Swiss incubator revoked its support, freezing Corlight's assets pending further investigation. Regulatory bodies began auditing their contracts. Danielle, stunned by the chaos, tried reaching out to her contacts for damage control but was met with radio silence. Internally, Corlight staff began resigning. One after another, private emails and chat logs were leaked, showing how Colin had discredited Maddie, referred to her as my obedient nerd, and manipulated team decisions behind closed doors. Maddie watched the collapse unfold from her quiet lab in New Jersey. Every file, every server ping, every email request for her to please come explain yourself was ignored. This wasn't vengeance. This was exposure, clean, clinical, and absolute. Colin was finally suspended by Corlight's board of directors. In a last-ditch effort to spin the story, he scheduled a live-streamed apology, hoping to salvage public opinion. The stream lasted only 8 minutes. His voice cracked. His eyes shifted. His excuses felt rehearsed. Comments flooded in, none of them forgiving. By the time he logged off, sponsors had begun pulling out of upcoming partnerships. Danielle vanished from public appearances, deactivating all social media and leaving behind only rumors of a one-way ticket to Europe. Maddie, unmoved, returned to her drone prototype. She had no interest in watching him fall. She was far too busy building something that would last. And as she sipped her tea and adjusted the calibration on her drone's flight sensor, she muttered under her breath, "I gave him everything he needed to succeed. And he weaponized it. Let them all learn, quiet doesn't mean weak." The sky opened up with rain the night Colin stood outside Maddie's apartment, drenched, disheveled, and desperate. He hadn't slept in 2 days, and it showed. His eyes were red, cheeks hollow, jaw trembling as he clutched a ruined bouquet of hydrangeas, Maddie's favorite, something he hadn't remembered in years. His custom-tailored coat clung to his frame like shame, heavy and soaked. He rang the doorbell again. No answer. From the other side of the door, Tricia watched through the peephole with folded arms, unmoved. Maddie was not even home. She was in a board meeting discussing expansion partnerships. "She's not here," Tricia said flatly, opening the door just wide enough for Colin to see her face. "But even if she were, you'd still be standing in the rain." Colin fell to his knees, muttering apologies, trying to reach past the threshold. "Please. Just let me explain. I lost everything." Tricia's glare hardened. "No. You threw everything away." As Colin knelt on the doorstep begging for forgiveness, Serena and Marcus sat in a car parked just across the street. Marcus had insisted they leave, but Serena refused. "She needs to know we're here," she whispered. Inside the car, Serena watched the man who once ridiculed her during family brunches now cry in a puddle of his own ruin. He humiliated her in front of 100 people. "Let him beg in front of strangers now," she murmured. Marcus remained silent, watching the spectacle unfold. From her boardroom in Jersey, Maddie was informed by Tricia that Colin had come crying. She didn't flinch. She didn't even pause her presentation. She simply responded, "Let him wait," then went on explaining her vision for a drone distribution network across disaster-prone zones in South America. Maddie wasn't heartless, she was healed. And healing had taught her that sometimes closure wasn't about giving someone a second chance. It was choosing yourself loud enough that silence said the rest. Later that evening, Colin sat at the base of the building, soaking and shivering. When he finally returned to his temporary apartment, he found an envelope taped to his door. Inside was a court order, a formal notice severing all ties to Maddie's patents, and a cease and desist letter from Hartley Innovations. It was stamped by Tricia's firm and witnessed by a federal tech compliance officer. That same day, his own mother, once proud and loud about her son's image, called Maddie to apologize. Maddie didn't answer. She didn't need to. She had blocked every number associated with Colin's world. From Danielle to Richard Greaves, to his family, to old friends who once laughed at her simplicity. Her world no longer bent to the voice that once controlled it. She didn't shout. She didn't retaliate. She simply vanished from his reach. And in the ashes of his empire, Colin realized something terrifying. The woman he had underestimated had become the storm he could never outrun. Maddie hadn't planned to meet anyone new, not in the romantic sense. Love was no longer a quest, it was a quiet memory she kept on a shelf she rarely dusted. So when she crossed paths with Liam Jensen, a softly spoken aerospace engineer at an innovation expo in Boston, she didn't notice him the way most women did. While others admired his brilliant presentations on aerothermal propulsion and his reputation for turning down NASA's job offer twice, Maddie only noticed one thing: the way he spoke about purpose. "Tech without purpose is noise," he said during a panel. The words settled into her like calm thunder. After the session, Liam approached Maddie, not because of her name, but because of her work. He had read about the original architect and had quietly followed her drone technology through academic channels. "You're building for life-saving purposes, not headlines." "That's rare," he told her. She smiled for the first time in weeks, an authentic, unguarded smile. They began collaborating on a design series focused on humanitarian drone delivery, Maddie's specialty with Liam's aerospace brilliance. Their chemistry was electric but never intrusive. Liam respected her silence and never asked about her past. Instead, they spoke about machine behavior in unpredictable climates, about equatorial wind tunnels and disaster algorithms. Their meetings, often accompanied by strong coffee and jazz playing low in the background, became Maddie's favorite part of the week. Serena noticed the glow returning to her sister's face and teased her. "Is this your romance sequel?" Maddie laughed and shook her head. "This is recovery," she replied. Tricia, who had met Liam once, approved. "He's like air, quiet, but necessary." Maddie never imagined she could feel this safe around a man again, not with her guard still up, not after everything. But Liam wasn't looking to rescue her. He only made space for her to rebuild, on her own terms, at her own pace. When Liam invited her to present their joint model at the Global Tech for Humanity Summit in Dubai, Maddie declined the keynote spotlight but agreed to oversee design and research. "Let your work speak." "You don't always have to," Liam had said, and somehow it comforted her more than any compliment ever could. Meanwhile, Marcus surprised Serena with a simple but heartfelt reproposal on a mountain hike in Vermont. This time, he didn't promise her children or timelines. He promised presents, whatever their future held. Serena said yes, with no fanfare, just tears and a kiss under fog-draped trees. Back in New Jersey, Maddie stood before the blueprint of a new dream, not a marriage, not revenge, not a fairy tale, just purpose. She would build a school for women in tech. Not to prove anything, but because no one had ever built one for girls like her. And maybe, just maybe, in this new world she was shaping, healing didn't need to come with fireworks, it could arrive in circuits and silence. Colin Rourke's life had shriveled into a cautionary tale. With Corelight Media legally frozen and most of his assets seized pending lawsuits, he was evicted from his luxury condo within 2 weeks. The glossy lifestyle he'd paraded, designer suits, chauffeured cars, rooftop parties, dissolved into thrift store shirts and ride shares. Gone were the cocktail parties where he once bragged about rebranding tech influence, and in their place were humiliating side hustles, short-lived consulting gigs, ghostwriting for tech blogs, and eventually selling webinar seats for a self-help course no one respected. Even his old fraternity brothers from Oregon, once his closest circle, stopped answering his calls. Danielle? Vanished. She had drained the last of their shared accounts and fled to Milan, leaving behind a brief email that read, "Sorry, darling, survival of the fittest." With the tech world turning on him and the media dragging his name through scandal after scandal, Colin was officially cancelled, and this time, there would be no rebrand. But perhaps the most gut-wrenching moment came during a job interview at a small digital firm in Brooklyn. The interviewer, a bright-eyed woman in her late 20s, paused halfway through his resume and asked, "Wait. Weren't you the guy who stole from the original architect?" The humiliation was complete. The room went silent. He tried to explain, something about misunderstanding, a misfiled patent, a bitter ex-wife, but it sounded pathetic even to him. She didn't finish the interview. As he walked out into the cold evening air, he saw a delivery drone pass overhead, sleek and bearing a logo he hadn't noticed before, Hartley Innovations. It pierced his chest like a dart. The world had moved on, but her name, her legacy, was becoming untouchable. She hadn't just erased him. She'd replaced him. Her silence was no longer a statement. It was dominance. And he, once the star of every panel, had become invisible in the very field he tried to claim. On social media, the tech community began rediscovering Maddie, no longer through gossip or scandal, but through impact. A viral video surfaced showing children in flood-prone communities receiving emergency supplies dropped by Maddie's Phoenix model drone. The clip ended with her voice narrating, "Innovation belongs to everyone, especially those told they're not enough." Publications called her the quiet giant. Schools began teaching her design framework. And then came the public confirmation. During a university keynote in Copenhagen, a prominent researcher presented Maddie's patent, original, signed, sealed, and dated, proving beyond a doubt that she had been the mastermind all along. Colin watched the broadcast from a corner table in a noisy cafe, sipping burnt coffee, surrounded by people who didn't recognize him anymore. His empire had fallen not with explosions, but with quiet revelations, undeniable facts, and a woman who didn't need to scream to be heard. He had laughed once. Now the world only laughed at him. While success blossomed around her, Maddie found herself grappling with a storm of a different kind, one rooted in the past. It began with a letter, discovered in an old filing box her mother had kept tucked away in their family attic in Duluth. Serena, while cleaning during a rare visit home, found it hidden beneath Maddie's childhood science fair awards. The envelope was yellowed, the ink faded, but the signature was unmistakable, Calvin Hartley, their late father. Inside, Maddie read words that stopped her breath. Her father had once been offered a prestigious role in a top military tech firm during the Gulf Crisis era, a position that would have brought fortune and notoriety. But he turned it down. "I'd rather teach my daughter how to solder wires than let the world teach her that ambition must come with a price," he wrote. Maddie sat in silence, clutching the note, tears clouding her vision. Her purpose had always been bigger than revenge. Inspired by the revelation, Maddie began sketching out a new initiative, a tech incubator not for profit, not for investors, but for legacy. Hartley Nexus, she called it, a hub dedicated to training military families, veterans, and children affected by war in the field of robotics and disaster response. She wanted to carry forward the dream her father had buried for the sake of their family's peace. With Liam Jensen's help and Trisha's legal structuring, she secured government grants and began partnerships with NGOs. Maddie used her own story as a blueprint, not the scandal, but the resilience. She wasn't interested in being a tech mogul. She wanted to build an ecosystem where the next Maddie didn't need to be betrayed before being believed. Every decision was calculated, but deeply emotional. And for the first time, Serena felt inspired to open up about her own pain, offering her interior design skills to create safe, healing-forward learning spaces for kids who had known too much war and too little opportunity. Meanwhile, Marcus, ever the quiet observer, found his own path colliding with Maddie's. In one of his legal security scans, he stumbled across data logs linking Danielle Raines to Richard Greaves going back 3 years, long before the public fallout began. It turned out Danielle hadn't just been Colin's mistress. She was part of a corporate espionage ring targeting women-led tech startups, stealing proprietary ideas and selling them to male-dominated firms to rebrand and monetize. Marcus connected the dots, compiling a report that implicated both Greaves and Danielle in more than just Maddie's downfall. He handed the evidence to Trisha, who then launched a private investigation through her firm. Maddie, initially shocked, felt the edges of her fury reignite, but not for herself. For the dozens of women who might never know they were robbed. The next phase of Maddie's legacy wasn't just about innovation. It was about justice, for every silenced mind. And this time, she wasn't alone. Colin's final plea came not in a boardroom, nor at her doorstep, but in the form of a digital article that went viral within hours. Titled "To the Woman Who Made Me," it read like an open confession, half apology, half defense. He admitted to his arrogance, his obsession with optics, his need to be adored, and how he had underestimated the quiet genius of the woman he once called wife. Maddie didn't just design drones, he wrote, she designed me into someone I could have been if I hadn't let ego lead. The article was eloquent, haunting, and surprisingly vulnerable. Some readers forgave him, others ridiculed it as a PR stunt. But Maddie didn't respond publicly. She read the piece late at night, alone, her fingers trembling slightly, not with sadness, but with the emotional exhaustion of remembering who she used to be when she loved him. She closed the tab, let out a breath, and whispered, "It's too late." While the world debated Colin's motives, Maddie poured herself deeper into Hartley Nexus. She worked hands-on with students, young girls from military homes, trauma survivors from war-torn cities, veterans rediscovering hope through creation. In a small, sunlit room in Newark, she taught a 12-year-old amputee how to program a drone with voice-activated controls. The girls' laughter reminded Maddie of everything she had lost and everything she had found. The press continued to reach out, begging for a statement on Colin's letter. "Do you feel vindicated?" they asked. Maddie only gave one response. She anonymously donated $100,000 in Colin's name to a shelter for displaced youth, his name listed under the comment, "May this pain serve someone's healing." When Colin found out through a news article, he cried, not because he was forgiven, but because she still had more grace in her than he had ever deserved. Yet still, she didn't reach out. Some stories didn't need sequels. Some chapters remained closed, unbothered, and final. Danielle, on the other hand, would not go quietly. The legal investigation, driven by Marcus and Tricia's compiled evidence, exposed Danielle's long-standing fraud network with Richard Greaves. The women-led companies they dismantled were now filing class action suits, with Maddie providing strategic support behind the scenes. Danielle, stripped of her company, assets, and public credibility, attempted one last desperate move, leaking falsified emails to frame Maddie as the mastermind behind the corporate thefts. But her lies collapsed under cross-verification, and she was arrested in Prague attempting to escape extradition. Richard Greaves fled to South America, now on an international watch list. Maddie never spoke their names aloud again. She didn't celebrate their fall. She didn't need to. Justice had its rhythm, and hers was steady. She had not just survived betrayal, she had transformed it into movement, meaning, and memory. And in the quiet that followed, the world didn't hear a victory scream, they heard legacy breathing. Serena's wedding was nothing like the grand affair she once dreamed of, but it was perfect. Held in a cozy coastal vineyard in Rhode Island, surrounded by only family and a few close friends, the ceremony felt more like a promise than a performance. Marcus stood at the altar with softened eyes, no longer the man driven by pressure and pride, but one who had chosen presence over perfection. Serena, dressed in a pale ivory gown with lace sleeves and her hair in soft waves, walked down the aisle escorted by Maddie. It was a silent gesture of gratitude and strength between sisters. Tricia gave a toast that made everyone laugh and cry, and Maddie, though not emotional by nature, had to blink away tears when Marcus vowed to never let another storm silence your sunshine. The past didn't vanish, but it no longer had control. This was what healing looked like, raw, intentional, and beautifully incomplete. Hartley Nexus expanded beyond expectation. With global partnerships and educational alliances forming across continents, Maddie was now leading one of the most respected humanitarian tech incubators in the world. A school in Peru requested a special drone curriculum designed to help isolated villages. In Kenya, girls from refugee camps were learning how to code and fly drones with Maddie's tech. She refused to franchise. Impact isn't a business model, she told a pushy investor. At one summit, her work was awarded the International Peace Tech Medal. She didn't attend the ceremony. Instead, she sat in a Newark lab, eating pizza with Liam and a group of girls celebrating their first successful drone landing. Liam had become her right-hand collaborator and quiet compass, never overstepping, never asking for more. When he gently brought up the possibility of something more between them, Maddie smiled and said, "I'm finally whole. If I ever love again, it has to start from there." And Liam simply replied, "Then I'll wait until you say now." Tricia proposed to her longtime girlfriend, Noelle, under the Brooklyn Bridge with a paper ring and a terrible song playing on a portable speaker. Maddie laughed so hard when she found out that she almost dropped her soldering iron. Their circle had survived storms, scandals, miscarried dreams, and betrayals that once felt fatal. Yet here they were, choosing joy again. Not the performative kind, but the hard-earned version that comes from survival. Maddie no longer measured her days by what had been lost or stolen. Her milestones weren't anniversaries or headlines, they were the smiles of children flying drones, the thrill of launching a new project, and the echo of her father's voice in her heart. She had built something bigger than success. She had built freedom. Colin's name was a ghost no one mentioned anymore. Not because it hurt, but because it no longer mattered. And in every sunrise, Maddie was reminded, the sky didn't fall. It just made room for something higher. The ocean breeze whispered against Maddie's cheeks as she stood barefoot on the edge of the quiet shoreline, a remote control in one hand and the sun warming her skin. Around her, a group of girls, ages 11 to 16, cheered as their self-built drones hovered, danced, and landed gracefully across the sand. It was opening day of the Hartley Nexus Summer Tech Retreat, and Maddie insisted the first session be held not in a lecture hall, but here, at the edge of possibility. The girls were not just coding, they were healing. Survivors of war, loss, abandonment, and silence, they now spoke in equations, logic, and flight paths. Maddie knelt beside one child, helping her rewire a sensor, and paused only when a gentle voice behind her said, "You built this from nothing." She turned to find Liam, smiling, holding 2 iced lemonades. She took one, clinked his cup, and replied with a shrug, "Nothing. Or everything." Later that evening, after the last drone had landed and the girls were gathered around a campfire roasting marshmallows and laughing without fear, Maddie slipped away to the old lighthouse that now served as her retreat's lookout post. Inside, framed photos hung along the walls, not of her, but of her students. Smiling, graduating, inventing. She sat at the desk and opened her journal, writing a single sentence, "I forgive myself for staying too long, and I'm proud I left in time." Her reflection in the glass window didn't look sad or triumphant, it looked free. There was no wedding ring on her finger, no lingering resentment in her voice, no thirst for recognition. Maddie Hartley had reinvented her life so completely that even grief had found new purpose. Tricia and Noelle would arrive the next day to teach a workshop, and Serena was sending her nursery design blueprints to be installed in the new family housing unit. Everything Maddie once dreamt of now existed, reimagined, redefined, and real. Across the ocean, on a faded patio in Greece, Colin sat alone with a blank notebook. No assistants, no business cards, no legacy. Just the crashing of waves and a silence he couldn't dress in luxury. He had tried to move on, to rebuild, but no investor trusted him, no pitch stuck. His apology had brought no redemption, and Danielle's betrayal left scars he no longer blamed on anyone else. He scrolled through news articles about Hartley Nexus, saw Maddie's impact spreading globally, and finally understood she had never needed to scream or fight to win. She had simply stopped giving him the pieces of her that once held him together. As the sky dimmed over the water, Maddie stood atop the lighthouse, the horizon ahead, bright, endless, hers. Not once did she look back. Because this wasn't revenge. This was rebirth. And this was her new beginning. The end.